we've got 2 fireside chats today, and really the idea is to give you all some inspiration, get some hot tips on how you can maximise the return on investment in your career. So Thomai is the first guest today, and Thomai and I have known each other for a couple of years. Probably like
10, 15, yeah.
Probably more. And we're going to talk about your career. But for those of you who don't know Thomai, she's the current CPO at Telstra, and I think you're managing spend of about 14 billion, is it?
That's right, yeah.
36 categories,
Yes.
200 in your team. So this is a serious job, and we thought you might like to get to know Thomai a little bit better and hear her career story. So Thomai, can we just sort of start with an overview of where's your career taken you today? It hasn't been concreted, has it?
There's parts of it that have been concrete. I was in IBM for 19 years as a graduate. I came in as a grad, and I got to this now or never moment where I thought, oh well, there's an opportunity to do something different. I was very happy at IBM, and it was just one of those moments where I thought, oh, it was time to look at something different. So I did a lot of different things in IBM, and I think that's. When I reflect back, it was many careers and many different roles in that company. So it was hard to leave, and it was quite emotional to leave at that point. But then I moved on to National Australia Bank, and it was very different, and I learnt a lot. I realised that there's a lot of value in moving around and doing different things. So IBM, NAB, and Telstra now, and in my early career in particular, and even while I've been at Telstra, just doing different things. So working on the sales side, working for delivery teams, I was on a project. I did a project at Telstra 2 years ago where there was a lot more of a program management perspective rather than managing a large procurement team. So I think all those experiences make you realise that you need to stay in touch with what's going on with the company that you're working in and with outside the world that you're working in. So.
One of the best tips that I had when people resign, always a pleasant moment when someone you really love comes in and resigns, and they say most people have this real aha moment when they decide to leave a company. And, I don't know if you had any of those in those 3 big moves, but I guess the question always in my mind is, when do you know it's a real aha moment, when you do have to move, or when it's a situation that you just have to ride out?
I think it's a split-second decision for me, and I know I didn't plan it. I have it on a Gantt chart. Oh well, you just weigh it up and you ask your gut. I mean, I really do go with, how do I really feel about this? And I know it's scary to do the change, but also there's this moment where you go, I'm just going to do it. And I know I reflected when I left IBM. That was a long career there, 19 years, and at the time I was working not in procurement. I was working as a project delivery executive on a large account, which was in trouble, but I managed to get a great team around me, and we managed to turn it around. And I realised that my next move in IBM would have been a more senior role doing the same things, and I just thought I was working really long hours. I had a very young family. I thought, this is not, it's exciting and it's great, but I don't think I want to do another one of these. And then a role came up at NAB, and I thought, no, it wasn't a CPO role, it wasn't as anything as senior as what I was doing at IBM. But I just thought, I think this is the right thing to do, and I just did it. And I haven't looked back in any change that I've done. There hasn't been one I thought I really shouldn't have left that. There's always something positive to look forward to, yeah.
Onward and upward.
Yeah, well, even if it's onward and sideward.
Yeah.
Or in that case, it was onward and not even sideward. I went from managing a team of 80 technical delivery people on a complex IT project to managing one person in a procurement function. So that was the change that I went to when I went to NAB.
What are the differences between, consulting and being outside the house to being in the house? Do you think that's been a valuable experience for you?
I think there's value in both, and when you have because I work closely with consultants as well, and I really enjoy the refreshing approach, the differences, the changes, the challenges they throw. But then I also know the complexity of implementing some of the things that you've got to implement. So having that balance and having that understanding, and having both is much better than having one or the other. I think it's that being open to, being curious to their perspective, and anyone's perspective, not just consultants. Yeah. I think that makes a big difference in forming my own opinions. And I even today, I don't sit there and think I've got all the answers or I know exactly what I want to do. I've got a very good idea of what I think we should be doing. But if someone comes in with something new, I'm always curious. I'm always saying, well, why do you say that? How do you see this playing out? And really digging beneath the surface. And often, sometimes someone who throws the idea out hasn't thought about it as deeply as I'm thinking about it, because I'm thinking about implementing it. But just having that idea then shifts my thinking, and I'm always on a trajectory to learn. I don't think I know everything about where procurement's going, what we're going to do, but I certainly want to understand what other people are thinking.
Do you think that's what a lot of people coming up the ranks worry about, is that the leader knows everything and they're a bit reticent to put their big idea forward? So I think what you're saying there is, have the courage, because you may have that breakthrough idea.
Absolutely, and in fact, I think the more senior you get, the less you know. I know there's a funny paradox.
According to Gus, absolutely,
it's true.
Real
because
concreted in.
Because I don't have to sit here and worry about the purchase ordering process anymore. I know it's really important, and I'd love to get it better, but my day to day is not thinking about that. And I know there's in Telstra hundreds of people that worry about that, because they have to raise them, not necessarily with the procurement team. So the people who are facing that every day have got much better ideas about how to improve it than I ever will. And that's a very simple one, but you can extrapolate that to the kind of contracts we're putting in place, the commercial negotiations we have to do. In Telstra, just like in many organisations, we're going through a transformation on being more agile. And a lot of that's about peer-to-peer conversations and solving problems at that level, rather than having to come up the tree all the time. And even with disputes or things that don't work out, it's the question you always have in your mind is, how do I solve for this without having to go up the tree? And I think that's very simple, but that's what I'm looking for now. A lot of the conversation is, well, tell me a bit more about that. Why do you think that? Rather than going, often I can draw the line between the closest 2 points, go from A to B, but often you need to go around a bit before you get to the destination.
When you do need to go up the tree, Gus and I both spoke about getting big ideas through big companies. Is there anything that we've touched on that resonated with you? You've worked with some of the country's largest companies. What have you learned about getting big ideas through big companies?
I think, we do laugh when Gus is talking about the business case and the 5-year plan, but I've lived that, and I know a lot of people have lived that. That's not a joke, that's actually a reality. But right now, the things that are picking up are the ones where my team can affect almost without even talking to me. Or they'll come and they'll say, we need to do this, and I'll say, okay, what do you need for that? And when it's just, let me give it a go, let me try this, I'm going to try a few different things, I just need your support, that has a lot more traction. It's very unlikely we're going to go up with $40 million capex ask for a systems change, although sometimes you really feel like you need that. It's more about, what can we do with what we've got, and this is continuous innovation. And I don't mean innovation in we've discovered a whole brand new product, but innovation in terms of we're making minor improvements everywhere, and all those minor improvements end up making it easier and better for our team. So, and then there's some medium ones. So I think the big bang is really, I'm not seeing a lot of that. In fact, a lot of the consultants I speak to are saying it's no more, the big bang for anything is not resonating, and people aren't prepared to invest as such. It's more about, what are the things you can do, and how do you create that as a program, how do you keep everyone aligned, how does everyone communicate? We're talking all sorts of collaborative tools. So there's a lot of things that we're doing now to try and build this, not from my head down, but from bottom up and across ways, without even having to come up to me a lot of the time.
What about mentors and sponsors, throughout your career or the role you play with others? Do you feel like you've had some great mentors and sponsors, and is there any advice for people?
I've had, and I'm not sure, I won't label them mentors or sponsors, because sometimes that's got really narrow connotations, but I've had some key advice given to me by people who I may not have even considered as being a mentor or a sponsor. And sometimes it's your manager, because when you have a reasonable relationship with your manager, they sometimes tell you things that others may not be telling you, but are really, really hit the mark. And I'll never forget when I first became my first ever people manager role. The guy that was my manager was Canadian, and he eventually went back to Canada. And I said to him, what would you, he was always really positive and giving me good feedback. And I said, what would you say is the best, what would I be working on? And he said, just don't panic, because I remember I was a manager and I thought, my job is to make sure I've read every email everyone sent me through the day. And sometimes I'd be up till 2 doing email and then, rocking up the next day. And that probably wasn't the best way to be. And he just said, just don't panic. And I thought, I've kept that. There's the bits of advice like that I've received throughout my career that are kind of the cornerstone of how I try to be.
A lot of people, when they're, ambitious, worry about finding a mentor. And I think a lot of people say, don't worry about it. Your mentors kind of just emerge, or they'll become apparent to you, rather than specifically seeking someone out. So would you probably subscribe to that theory?
I do. And there's someone who I met at NAB, and he was a consultant, and he approached me and he said, look, Thomai, I've never been this close to a CPO.
Neither have I.
And I'd really like to, if you could spend some time with me and I can pick your brain and I just ask you questions once a month. And that was how it started. And I left NAB, he left the consulting company he was working for, and we still catch up every quarter or every 2 months. And I said to him, he still says, oh, you're a great mentor. And I said, it's 2 ways, because often when I'm talking to him about whatever his issue is and I'm thinking through and giving him advice, it just reinforces what's worked for me, because sometimes you don't think about what works for you. And so I said, you're giving me insights into problems I'm having now that I've forgotten advice I would give myself almost. And that interaction is really valuable too. I think that, and that's very informal. That wasn't anyone setting us up, but that's endured because it's mutually beneficial, if that's the best way to put it. If someone, I've mentored people who've come to me really just to get a job, and that then after they get a job, there's nothing to talk about because now they've got a job. So there's different ways, and I'm not saying any are good or bad, but the ones that this has endured, 6 years or more, 7, because I'm getting benefit out of it as well, and there's a lot of mutual communication.
And does he drive it? Does he reach out? And
he does. We've got a standing meeting in my diary. And then if we haven't got time, we'll move it or cancel it. But most of the time we both meet, and it's just, it doesn't feel like mentoring. That's why I'm saying my definition for mentoring is not specific. And there's times when people wanted a role and they've worked with me, and there's other times when people just wanted to,
There's definitely people I catch up with every, 6 to 2 months, always in the diary. We have a quick phone call, and a lot of it's personal actually, but then you do touch on a bit of business. Now, earlier you spoke about changing roles and being in different functions throughout your career. How's that helped? Or has it?
It has. And I would say that the feedback I consistently get and have always gotten in my career is, are we coming to you because we know you're going to help us? And part of that has to be, I have been on the front line in the sales teams or in the delivery teams, and I know what it's like when you're absolutely panicked and stressed and something has to happen, and someone from some central function, including procurement, will say, you need a purchase order for that. Sorry, we can't do anything. And so it's not that the purchase order or the problem isn't, the process isn't important. It is. I work for large corporations, and without that, everything falls apart. But there's some empathy that you've got to have with the person at the other end who doesn't really know what to do, and they're angry or they're panicked. And often we can just go away and figure it out. But the empathy that you show in that situation to try and move things so that they can get what they want and you can get what they want is what creates the relationships that then, I think that part of the reason why I've got the role that I've got is because that's kind of the reputation I have in the company. And so I'm not saying everyone loves me, but at least a lot of people have this view that I'm a team player, I'm collaborative, and I'm trying to help out, not just protect my process, even though my process is really, really important.
I was speaking to one of the team from Australian Submarine Corporation during, when we were all getting our name tags and registering, and they'd moved from sales into procurement and just felt it was an easy step for one because they were just moving from one side of the table to the other. But then, just understanding buying and selling. So it certainly seems like it's worthwhile. Now, when the lovely Hugo interviewed you for your blog, you had two pieces of advice for everyone. One was to get commercial and the other was to develop awareness. Can you elaborate on those and what's your hot tips?
So being commercial, they're both very linked. So being aware is walking into any meeting, whether it be internal or external, and understanding what's going on in the room or what's going on for that person. So if you're walking in just with your mindset in there and saying, I need to get ABC, whatever ABC is, ABC may or may not happen depending on what that other person's thinking or how they're feeling or what's going on for them. So if you're not aware of, I've walked in a room where there's been such tension that you just can't get a conversation or a negotiation going. Or I've been in a room where there's fear, where you just think, I can't even, no, it's not even in my, where people are too scared to say what's got to be said in order that we all get what we want. And so if you're not aware, and so the first point of order isn't to state what I think should happen. The first point of order is to really understand what's going on here that I'm understanding or I'm not understanding, and to poll that. If the more awareness you get in any part, and this is not just in procurement situations, in your personal situations, but being aware of what's going on, or even acknowledging that you may not know what's going on to yourself, is a good starting point for any. Otherwise, you're just dealing with what's going on in your head, and quite often that might be totally different to what's actually going on in reality. And that then leads into being commercial. So there's no point walking into a room and having a hard conversation with a supplier, a colleague, your boss, and not really understanding what your position is or what's really going to happen here. It may not pan out the way you want it to pan out, but to think you're in a negotiating position when you're really not, that's just that. Or when things seem really desperate and you feel like you've got no lever, then think about how you would play that. Don't pretend that you're walking into a situation where you've got commercial levers. Does that make sense? So that ability to be commercial is practice. It's and some people do it really well intuitively. Don't get me wrong, some people don't. But the more you practice that, this is why I think a lot of companies do need a procurement person, because you do this enough times, eventually you'll go, okay, this contract wasn't, and none of my contracts have ever been perfect. I've never walked out going, I've got everything I need in this negotiation. That's not how it works. But the next time I go in, I'll know things that I felt like I really missed out on, and I need to get into this time and this time and this time. And therefore, the best people that I know, the best procurement people I know, have a really clear understanding in their head, and sometimes in a checklist, but what they want to get out of something, rather than trying to get everything. What are the key things? So that commercialness is something that I think you can practice. It can be codified, but more often than not, it's something that you've just got to walk through the fire on. I don't think you can get the perfect commercial person, coming out the door.
That's one thing I often think about. We learn all our skills, but how do we learn commercial judgment? And those really important decisions, like you said, procurement is often the commercial true north. The conscience of an organisation, and I think about, well, how does the profession develop those judgment skills? We don't have a commercial judgment training course. My suspicion is that in particularly large companies, you learn a lot by the culture and the way your senior management leads and the decisions it makes. So you kind of learn through experience and watching others. Do you think that's been a huge benefit to you at IBM and Telstra, such large companies? And do you think it's valuable for someone in their career to spend time in these large companies?
I have spent all of my career in large companies. So I was talking to Gus before, and when he was sitting here next to me, he's not there now.
Ghost of
still sitting next to me, and he said that he dropped out of corporate about 3 years ago, and we were talking a little bit about what's next and what you do, what you do with your life when you grow up, that kind of discussion. But having been in large corporates, I think you realise the more senior you get, that it really is just people. And everything is people. All the processes are about people. All the conversations are about people. And so commercialness is understanding humans really to a large degree, and being in lots of uncomfortable situations where sometimes you just have to go, I don't know the answer to this, and be willing to say it. I say that more and more now, but I feel like...
Get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah, well, it really is, and that's beyond just the words, Tania. It's about, okay, I'm in this situation, I'm hearing this side, I'm hearing that side, I'm hearing all the sides. This is what the problem is. I don't know what the answer is, and I don't think I can tell you what it is, and maybe it's going to take us a few rounds to get there. Because when I can say that, then I get real... I had a roundtable actually in Melbourne yesterday with some of my team who are talking a little bit about the sentiment on the floor at the moment. We're going through a lot of change. A lot of people are feeling uncomfortable. And what I got out of that, at the end of it was just so good to have a human discussion about it, not just about the numbers or not just about fear. Because one of the things that we have to acknowledge is when people are not... Asking people who don't talk up in meetings because they're feeling unsafe to just speak up doesn't really make them speak up. What am I doing to create an environment that has people speak up about the things that they want to say, whether I agree with them or not, such that we then get a real conversation? That's the thing. I think whether it's commercial, whether it be a HR issue or a HR matter, whether it be a business matter internally, whatever the issue is, until you get to the spot where actually you're having a real conversation with someone, it's very difficult to know. It's very difficult to progress whatever it is you're trying to get to the end goal.
And for some people, that's a really big step from being, having these almost two faces, this corporate persona and their personal persona. And we get a lot of questions from people just about their social media profiles, like, can I have two profiles? Am I one person, my two people? So what's your advice to people when they're trying to bridge that gap?
People can tell really, I think it's
About
part
being
of the
authentic?
part of the human condition, and the more I see it, people can tell when you're not being yourself. And I'm not saying therefore put photos of everything you did on the weekend, because I think there's a level where you go, okay,
Too much data.
well, no one really cares what I did on the weekend, really. Some of it was very mundane and very boring. So I don't know that really needs to be shared, but if I'm saying things that I truly don't believe in any conversation, people just may not say it, they may not feel it, they may not even think it, but there's this uncomfortableness that you feel, and that you can't fake it. I don't think there's any human being, there may be the very few, who can really fake that. And so be yourself, and be yourself in a way that people understand who you are when they're talking to you, and that they believe you, but also that you're credible. That if you're, it's not. You don't have to tell people every single problem you've got. There's a line where you've got to go, really? What I had for breakfast isn't really important to anyone in this room, but maybe there's a story about how I, what are the lessons I've learnt in that's more important, or who am I as a person? What are the indecision points? How do I make decisions? They're things that are interesting because then it resonates for people, and people believe that's because they recognise that in their own life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and they say people now, new recruits, Generation Next, buy into their bosses, not the organisations as much. And I think they do want to know who their leader is, what they stand for, who they're connected with.
What's important to you.
Exactly, yeah. And they'll buy into that. Just as if you're reporting to someone, your stakeholders will buy into you as well. Final question. You've started a new job. Someone in here started a new job. What's your advice in the first 30 days?
The first thing for me is to really get my team's changed a little bit, so really get to know my team really well, make sure the connections and the constant discussion is there. Getting to know my new boss.
Oh, new boss, I didn't know.
He's been there since about July, and so he's
Does he share what he did on the weekend to me?
He does. He's actually
too much.
No, not too much. He's really. When you, I've been very lucky. Always had really good bosses, and he's just another one that's coming in, and he's very human. And I always say to anyone I speak to, I'm very lucky with my boss. So, because I do think even not just Generation X, but you join a company and you leave a manager, and I think that's always been and you think, I think that resonates, or you wait out the manager, one or the other, it's
Who goes
one
first?
or
You or
the
me?
other. But getting to know my boss and my stakeholders, and that's what we do. A lot of my stakeholders have changed because there's a lot of change in Telstra. So just resettling all that is kind of it's about the people. The work will always be there, and it will continue to be there. So there's always going to be too much work, not enough people, and I like that. Be resourceful. I've took some of the quotes, I wrote them down, and I've tabbed them in my phone. So yeah, be resourceful, and I'm now in that phase of how do we be more resourceful? Absolutely.
Yeah, Gus was fantastic. I really loved the audio tape example. I bought my son a Walkman and I forgot how to turn the tape over. It was hysterical. Exactly the same situation.
Because it's vintage?
Yeah, it's vintage, Mum. This is so
Walkman
cool.
is vintage.
This is so cool. So look, thank you so much. And once again, thank you for sponsoring today. I mean, I think in fact that you have sponsored this event, that Telstra sponsored it, shows a lot of leadership and that you're supportive of developing talent and inspiring the profession. So, if it wasn't for people like you and organisations like Telstra, we wouldn't be able to do this. So
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.